Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in to hear me address a response that I received from YouTuber Adam Something. If you're watching this without any context, Adam made a video called Why Academia is So Left-Leaning, and I disagreed with it so strongly that I created this channel just to respond. Feel free to watch his video first if you haven't already. It's in the upper right hand corner. Anyway, I made a video critiquing his video, and in the interest of being transparent about that critique, I sent it to Adam himself so he'd have the chance to respond if he wanted to. Well, he did respond via email, and that letter is the letter that we will be reviewing and responding to now. Also, in this video, I am only responding to about half of Adam's response letter. The second half of the response will be released tomorrow. But before we start looking into his response, I want to note a few things. First, I want to reiterate that Adam Something has some great content. This discussion is limited to his statements made in the original video about leftism and academia, and the things in his email to me. Secondly, I may well be wrong about various things. I'm interested in getting to the truth of things though, and that's why I'm making this. Third, I want to note that when I talk about conservatives in this video, I'm especially referring to conservatives within the United States. A lot of what I say will apply to other countries as well, but I don't want to talk too much on conservatism in other countries since it becomes a very broad discussion. Finally, this video is long because I wanted to be able to read every single word that Adam Something wrote and respond to it. I don't want to run the risk of taking something out of context. So maybe get up and do your dishes or sit down and have a snack and enjoy the show. Alright, let's begin. Adam writes, "This is the first ever response video to me that I know of, so I'll respond here. I won't link this video on any of my platforms though, since I don't like clout fishing, but I also don't want your video to be dogpiled. And make no mistake, there is a lot to dogpile you on." Well, Adam, all I will say is that I made this channel on a whim just because I felt compelled to do so by your video, and I'm making this video because I want to respond to your email and do so in a thorough way. Adam goes on to say, "Also, intellectually dishonest propaganda piece. Nice." I made that statement, yes, and I do stand by it, and I'll get to it later. In the rest of the letter, Adam will restate my argument in his own words, and then he'll respond to it. I like the way he did this. Let's begin. I claimed that Adam has a cliched understanding of conservatives, but there are lots of veritable people who agree that academia is a leftist hug box, like Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, and Piers Morgan. In response, Adam says, "Jordan Peterson is a conservative grifter. Joe Rogan will agree with the last thing you said to him regardless of what it was. And Piers Morgan writes stuff like, 'Wake up, why the liberal war on free speech is even more dangerous than COVID-19. Now, I'm not going to get into a debate about each of these public figures because, in my opinion, that is just a distraction from the original argument I made. But I'll confess, he suckered me into responding to at least one. The only comment I will make is regarding the last example about Piers Morgan. You appear to think that the title of his own article is enough to discredit him, but actually you are supporting my original point. The article demonstrates that it's not just a bunch of far-right nutjobs that are concerned about the censoring of speech. Piers might not be quite as far left as you are, but he's certainly not a conservative. And, by the way, let's start a little counter for each time Adam attacks the person I use in examples instead of talking about the example itself. I'm going to start at 3 since he already hit Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, and Piers Morgan. Okay, let's back up and look at all 3 statements and their role in the disagreement. Adam attacked each of the examples that I brought up of public figures calling out the censoring and limiting of free speech that is being committed by leftists against not just conservatives, but anybody that disagrees with them on hot topic issues. Remember that my point was not to defend each of these public figures. My point was that Adam was feigning ignorance in his original video about the existence of these free speech conversations. His argument was, as I understand it, that conservatives are underrepresented in academic institutions, mainly because they don't have the traits that it takes to be in academia.
And right here we can start seeing the problem. Do any of these values describe conservatism? Absolutely not. They are in fact antithetical to modern conservatism. So right off the bat, universities have a selection bias against conservatives. And keep in mind, this is not deliberate. It's just a natural consequence of how the world works.
My original point was clearly that conservatives are largely absent from academia because they've been increasingly forced out of it, not because they have self-selected out. Now, I recognize that some conservatives are self-selecting out of academia, and that's partly because of the pressure from the left, and of course, there is a small minority of people within conservative circles who actually fit the description that Adam was using as his original caricature of conservatives, which are closed-minded racists. In response to my point that even classical liberals are concerned about the censoring of free speech, Adam claims that the term classical liberal should be an alarm bell that you're dealing with a conservative not wanting to call themselves that. and he gives the example of Sargon, who he says is a white nationalist. Now, Adam appears to not want to take the term classical liberal at face value, and instead wants to make it seem like it's some covert word that racists hide behind. While it's possible that there are people who call themselves classical liberal who are trying to hide something about themselves, it seems equally possible that there are people who use the term leftist to hide the fact that they're actually terrorists. My point here is simply to say that you can always point out bad people who are abusing terms and trying to twist the definitions. But in order to have a good discussion, my experience is that you have to agree on some basic terms and not assume that there's some evil or deceptive intent behind a term that someone else uses. So, to sum up, I disagree with his statement. The term classical liberal is not an alarm bell, at least not in any conversation I've ever had. If you want more evidence than that, I'm afraid I don't have any because I haven't completed a study to determine it. If you find a study that appears to prove me wrong, then I'll reconsider, but until then, I'm going to stick with the dictionary and historical definition of a classical liberal and not pretend it's something else. Next, Adam says that I've misunderstood his point about the way universities select students. He says, the pre-selection comes from circumstance, not from the official process. As an example, you'll see more dyed hair in arts class than in an economy class, but that's not because hair color was a factor during enrolling. Adam's point was very clear. He said that conservatives are not represented in academia because they do not have either the capacity or willingness to be rational, open-minded, and curious.
But even if you do manage to get into academia as a conservative, holding your average conservative views such as anti-gay rights, anti-trans rights, anti-immigration, anti-big government, anti-abortion, and anti-welfare, you will find that you will not be able to engage in any sort of meaningful discussions inside academia. Turns out academic discussion is a bit different from poll threads.
By doing so, he has labeled millions, if not billions of people as somehow less than his own group. I don't see how this is much different from racism, except instead of race being the key factor, it's mainly religion and politics. Take a look at this video, which was taken in an online English course just this year.
What this seems to be a picture of.
It's just two people chilling.
Right, just two people. There's nothing more to this picture?
Nah, not really. Just two people chilling.
I don't believe that you believe that. I don't believe that you look at this as just two people. I don't think
Truly
you
it
can
is
look
just
at
two
this as
people,
just
though,
two
is it
people.
not?
Yeah, but I think you're being intentionally coy about what this is a picture of.
So, as I see it, the professor is forcing his racial bias into the lesson and accusing his student of being coy. Now, I don't know whether the student is conservative or not, but as a student, would you want to be reprimanded by your professor just for not answering a question the way he or she wants you to answer it? Maybe you can begin to see one reason why conservatives are not attending university as much. It's simple. If a conservative student doesn't have the same political views that their professor wants them to have, they are often criticized and penalized. You can see the link in the description from Real Clear Politics if you think that that video is fake. By the way, exclusion isn't new, and I don't want to make it sound like it is only the left that has ever done this. People have been excluded from various disciplines throughout human history, and sometimes it's been the conservative side that has not permitted more free-spirited thinkers into their institutions. Case in point, the historically conservative Roman Catholic Church strangling and burning revolutionary freethinkers at the stake, such as William Tyndale. Next, Adam believes I've misrepresented his view. He says, to rephrase it more accurately, people in academia tend to be more open-minded due to natural pre-selection. Conservatives tend not to be open-minded for the same reason. And, of course, I disagree. The end result of this more accurate rephrasing is the same as his original argument, which is that conservatives tend not to be in academia because they tend not to be open-minded. According to him, leftists, on the other hand, do tend to be open-minded. This is the argument that I rejected in the first video, and I maintain it. To sum up my original main points, which so far have not been refuted, they're as follows. 1. Conservatives are actively forced out of academia by leftist students and professors. I brought up one example of this, and I can bring up many more. Instead of denying that this is a problem, Adam deflected by making ad hominem attacks on the examples themselves instead of acknowledging the problem. I know it sounds edgy to say, Jordan Peterson is a grifter, but it's ultimately a distraction from the original issue. 2. Conservatives are not significantly less open-minded with regard to their ability to complete academic research. To suggest otherwise is to suggest they are by nature less than their leftist opponents. 3. Conservatives are not mostly racist or dull idiots as Adam caricatured in his original video. Sure, you're going to find hateful people in any corner you look. but it is intellectually dishonest to take the worst members of a group and try to make them representative of the group itself. We see this happening all the time on both sides of politics. This is why I made my original claim that the video was intellectually dishonest, and maybe now you see why I stick by it. Next, in response to my argument that conservatives are not significantly less intelligent than leftists, Adam responds by saying, "I recommend you read the abstract of the study you've linked in your description." The last sentence says, "My findings suggest that higher intelligence among classically liberal Republicans compensates for lower intelligence among socially conservative Republicans," meaning Republicans closer to the left have higher intelligence, which compensated for those who are farther away and have lower intelligence. This proves my point, not yours. Wait a minute. I thought that Adam said that classical liberal was a term to describe white nationalist conservatives, but now classical liberal describes someone closer to the left? It seems Adam is defining words in whatever way is most useful to him at the moment instead of being consistent. So which is it? Are classical liberals racist conservatives? Or are they almost on the left? Regardless, we're getting away from the original point, which was, and I quote from my earlier video, "Conservative types exhibit higher intelligence in some areas and lower in others, and vice versa." The point was not to say, haha, conservatives are smarter than leftists, because that's simply not true. I was very clear that the data is complex. Quantifying intelligence is a massive undertaking in the first place, and to expect that one side of the political aisle is going to be a clear-cut winner just ignores what we know about the complexity of various dimensions of intelligence. Let's imagine for a minute that leftists are, for example, 2 IQ points smarter on average than conservatives. Is that a reason for conservatives to be pushed out of academia? Don't we care more about results than labeling someone? The opposite is also true. If it turns out that conservatives are smarter than leftists in some dimension of intelligence, should leftists be barred from participating in academics? This kind of idea is elitist and dystopian, and stems from the same sort of thinking that brought us scientific racism and the idea that genetic makeup or environmental upbringing are grounds for discrimination. By the way, the main finding of the study that Adam tried to pull a gotcha with is that Republicans have slightly higher verbal intelligence on average than Democrats, but there are more people at the end of the curve in the Republican Party. In other words, the study demonstrates that people more towards the middle of the spectrum of left to right, in other words, classical liberals, exhibit higher verbal intelligence than both extremely conservative Republicans and more leftist Democrats. But guess what? Science is complicated and often is conflicting. Let's take a look at another study, this one by Kemmelmeyer in 2008, which says, quote, "There was also strong support for political extremists both on the left and right being higher in verbal ability than centrists." End quote. This seems to go against the previous study, or at least add a lot of nuance. Now, discussions about intelligence and its relationship to politics are interesting, but ultimately they detract from the real issues that real people are facing. Adam brought intelligence into this discussion originally by claiming that conservatives are, by definition, irrational, incurious, and closed-minded. Whether that's some kind of pre-selection or genetic basis is irrelevant. And I hope that, at the very least, I've demonstrated that his approach is not the most helpful way of looking at things. Also, I checked out the study that Adam linked, and I found it to be interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. I would respond to it in more detail, but since all Adam did was post a link instead of drawing any kind of conclusion from it, I don't want to get into detail about it now since there are more important things to address. I might address it in the future if Adam decides to bring it up in more detail. Next, Adam will respond to my point that Marxism, feminism, and gender ideology have been clung to increasingly by leftists and are not revisited and reviewed, and therefore the left is not as open as they would like to claim that they are. Adam responds, "Who in academia clings to Marxism? Do you think Capital is treated like the Bible or something? Who in academia clings to Marxism?" Well, to answer that question, people who claim to be Marxist cling to Marxism. In a 2015 survey of American professors, about 18% of social scientists identified as Marxist. And if we look at an overview of professors in every subject, a total of about 28% identify as either radical, activist, or Marxist. Also, according to a survey from YouGov, about 30% of American Gen Z says, quote, "Marxism deserves our support." Where do you think Gen Z is learning that? I don't know many teens that are voraciously devouring Marxist pamphlets at their local library. No, they're getting it from teachers. So to get back to your original point, I agree that not every professor clings to Marxism, but the data suggests that there are professors who identify as either Marxist, activist, or radical. Now, to be honest, there are of course Marxists who are actively evaluating the philosophy at a high level. Zizek is a popular example. Now, regardless of whether or not you're a fan of him, You can't deny that he is taking Marxism seriously and thinking about it. But I would argue that he is not the norm, at least compared to an entry-level Marxist professor. Take, for example, Ohio professor Evan Osborne, who holds a PhD in economics from UCLA. Professor Osborne tried to teach a course at his public university, but he made a big mistake. The course contained material that was critical of Marxism. Despite there already being pro-Marx courses that were skeptical of free market capitalism that students were required to take, Professor Osborne was denied the ability to teach his class. This is what he said in response. Quote, "We have an angry, radical left cohort in the department. They praise Marxism in the classroom. They will not let me teach critically about it, and numerous people in the university have refused to do anything about it. I do not want to change how economics is taught at WSU, broadly speaking. I just want my academic freedom to offer a different view to also be respected." Next, Adam asks, what on earth is gender ideology? We're getting into conservative propaganda or conspiracy. Alright, I'm glad you asked. First, an ideology is defined by Merriam's dictionary as a system of ideas and ideals, or the manner of thinking of a group. And of course, there are more definitions as well. So, gender ideology is simply a term I am using to talk about the system of ideas that contemporary social scientists hold about gender. If you read Wikipedia's article on gender, it's not a secret that there was a massive shift in academia's understanding of what gender even is, beginning in the 1950s. In fact, gender as applied to masculine-feminine qualities did not become differentiated from the way that language uses gender in its grammar until the 50s also. I'm sure Adam is much more familiar with this than I am since he has a linguistics background, if I recall correctly. Anyway, the gender-sex distinction was not codified until the 1960s. After this distinction was made, gender was eventually said to be a fluid construct. Now, of course, the loudest voices in the social sciences affirm the fluidity of not only gender, but also the fluidity of sex. So, we have a package of ideas that an entire group holds onto, namely social scientists and, of course, leftists to support what I'm calling gender ideology, and it forms the basis of their political ideals with regard to issues surrounding sex, medical treatment, and other things. Therefore, it is an ideology. Now you might wonder why Adam immediately labeled the term gender ideology a conspiracy. I could be wrong, but I think I know why he resorted to this. There is nothing wrong with an ideology per se, but leftists hate the ideology word because acknowledging it would require them to affirm that they have a systematic way of viewing the world. This flies in the face of their desire for constant revolution. If the leftists' highest aim is to be open-minded and always progressing, which requires change, then the greatest insult is to be accused of having an ideology or a manner of thinking, because it implies that there is a limit to the degree to which they can be open-minded. Please note that I'm referring to a prototypical leftist and not every individual. Next, Adam says, feminism has been constantly revisited, hence we have third-wave feminism. The problem with previous iterations was, for example, that they focused only on white middle-class women. But then people reevaluated things, and now we have the third wave. In some sense, I agree. Feminism has been constantly revisited, but was the second wave less radical than the first? Was the third less radical than the second? No. Each wave represented more and more radical ideas, such that early feminists would be mortified. Today, even a feminist who stopped at the second wave, so to speak, would be mocked by someone from the third wave. My point originally was not that leftist ideas surrounding feminism don't change at all, but rather that they do not change into a more moderate form. In other words, they don't revisit past eras and say, actually, we got it right back then. As far as I'm aware, today's feminists are not saying, maybe there should be some hesitance surrounding sex outside of marriage. Maybe it's an important aspect of keeping men and women accountable and maintaining strong families. That's all for this video. I'll be responding to the second half of Adam Something's letter in a video that will come out tomorrow. And as always, thanks for watching.